Der Bundesverband der Energie- und Wasserwirtschaft. BDEW Kongress 2010. Podcast. Referent Dr. Fatih Birol. Chefökonom International Energy Agency, Paris, Frankreich. Thema des Vortrags: CO2-neutrale Energieversorgung.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am really sorry that I have to give this speech in English, but when we have the discussion here, you will see that I will be not using any translation, as I think I can understand many of the comments and the questions in German. So, what I will try to do in the next 20 minutes or so, to tell you a bit on the, very briefly on the oil markets and where the oil prices can go, which is a major driver of many decisions we make as government, as industry, as the consumer in the street. Then I will talk a bit on the natural gas markets. There is an important change in the natural gas markets. I want to highlight this and its implications. And thirdly, as Mr. Chairman highlighted, I would like to talk a bit on the climate change and what can be done and what will be the implications for the energy sector. Let me start with oil. Now, when we look at the oil markets, there is a very important change. In the last 20, 30 years, almost more than 3/4 of the growth in the oil consumption came from the OECD countries. When we talk about the oil markets, the first country we look was United States. How does the US economy perform? Or we look at Europe, we look at Japan. These times are passé. They're over. OECD oil demand, we have seen in 2006, 2007, it will be very difficult to see those levels again, and they are in a decline for many reasons, including some structural change in the transportation sector, and if you wish, we can discuss that. And where does the growth come from? When you look at the numbers, already in the last 4 or 5 years, more than 40% of the global oil demand growth came from China. About 25% came from Middle East countries, the producers themselves, and other developing regions. So there's a shift there from, in terms of consumption, from the traditional consumers to the new consumers. And there is another shift, namely, all the growth in the last 4 or 5 years came from the transportation sector, cars, trucks, and airplanes. This is very important to note because in the transportation sector, the elasticity of price is very, very low. Even though the price of oil goes up, since we do not have readily available alternatives to oil products in the cars, for example, we still have to use it. Plus, we use a bit less the cars. We drive less kilometers, but we use cars. So this is an important change because in the past, oil was used in the electricity generation or for heating households. They have been already substituted by other fuels. Now, of course, economy is and will be the main driver of the global oil demand. How much the economy will grow will determine how much oil demand will come to the markets. But in general, with a rather modest global economic growth, we will see a rather strong oil demand growth, again, mainly coming from China, Middle East, the countries where the vehicle, car ownership levels are very, very low compared to, for example, European and the Japanese or US standards. Now, the question is whether or not we have enough supply, enough production in order to meet that growth, and what are the consequences of that. Now, When we look at the global reserves worldwide, we have plenty of reserves in the world. However, a big portion of the reserves we have, especially in the non-OPEC countries, they are in a decline, or they are going to decline very soon. So there will be a shift from the non-OPEC countries to OPEC countries. Just to tell you one number, I know that most of you are not very much into oil issues, but the oil prices are very important for determining many things in the energy sector. It is the reason I am going to give you this example. This decline in the existing fields, which are very strong in most cases in the non-OPEC countries, is so strong that if we were to assume the current oil consumption today, which is about 86 million barrels per day, would stay flat till 2030. Global oil demand wouldn't grow. I said it will grow, but let's assume it will not grow. It will stay 86 million barrels per day. Just to compensate the decline in the existing fields between now and 2030, we have to find, invest, and produce 45 million barrels per day of oil just to compensate the decline in the existing fields, just to stay where we are, which means to find 4 new Saudi Arabias and bring it to the markets in the next 20 years or so. And this is a major challenge. Another challenge here is on the change in the structure of the oil industry. If this 45 million barrels per day would come, or if we want to get more production in order to meet the growth in the potential demand, we have to see more and more oil come to the markets. And as I said, in the international oil companies, reserves are in decline, and if this oil growth would come, it would come more than 80% from national oil companies. In the past, it was the international oil companies which were dominating the game, and in the future, it will be the national oil companies, which means that a completely new structure, their production decisions, investment decisions, this may be well different than the markets, how the markets functioned in the past. And to me, putting these 3 things together, strong oil demand expectations, geological facts, plus the change in the oil industry, this hints one single result, namely, the era of cheap oil is over. The amount of oil price, or level of oil prices we have seen in the last 2-3 decades before 2008, and so $30, $40, $50, these times are passé. We may see some fluctuations here and there because of the economy and so on, but in general, the trend is that the oil prices are going to be on the high side. Now, let me tell you briefly something on the gas. Last November, early November, we published a book which we publish every year, World Energy Outlook, and Mr. Moderator already highlighted to that. One of our key messages there in November, that in the year 2010 and beyond, we would see a gas glut, lots of gas in the markets, and it would change the game. And today we are end of June, 8 months after that, and what we see that our projection there was not wrong. And this is a major issue, and I will tell you what are the reasons for that. The first one is that only 2-3 years ago, in the United States, everybody thought that the United States will import a lot of LNG because the domestic demand was increasing and domestic production was declining. US administration, US industry, and research institutes. But what we have seen is that there was a boom of domestic shale gas, unconventional gas. Today, it is reaching about 50%, half of the gas in the United States, and according to our projections, with a very moderate gas prices, about $5 per MBTU, in the next 20 years, United States will not need to import LNG or very little. And this is one of the major drivers which changed the game in the gas markets. Because the other driver of the gas glut is what is happening on the LNG markets. Between 2010, this year, and 2013, in the next 3 years of time, the global LNG capacity will increase by 50%, 50. It means whatever we built in the last 30, 40 years, we will build 50% of that in the next 3 years only. And one of the main drivers of that is many gas exporting countries also thought that they push the button for the projects to sell LNG to the United States. But now US doesn't need it. So this gas will be around. And the third reason, LNG is coming, US unconventional gas boom, and the third reason for the gas glut is the fact that the demand of gas in many countries are very weak. In 2009, European gas demand went down by 5.6%, a substantial drop. And US is the same, and some other countries are the same. So to put them together, we expect, as we said in November, through 2015, there will be a gas glut. There will be an oversupply of gas, unused gas capacity, about 200 BCM, which is 6-7 times higher than what we usually see in the markets. So, and what does this gas glut mean? What kind of implication it has? First of all, because of the gas glut, we see that the LNG prices are very mild. And there is a growing divergence between the gas prices, which are linked to, in the long-term contracts, to oil prices and the gas sold as a LNG in the markets. And it is very interesting to observe for us that many companies are sitting with the gas exporters on the table, try to find, first of all, new creative formulas in the future for the new long-term gas contracts, not only linking one-to-one to oil. And second, some of the companies, important companies, as we have told to many companies in November, sitting on the table with the exporters to improve the current conditions of the existing long-term contracts. And I know that there are at least 3 European companies who have improved those conditions. Again, as a result of this strong LNG in the markets, in Europe and Asia, there is a rapid increase in some of the importing countries to get more LNG. And another one is many countries now are trying to repeat the success of North America, US and Canada in their countries, in Poland, in China, Australia, and elsewhere. Of course, one shouldn't jump immediately to the conclusions that there will be a global unconventional oil wave coming, but I can tell you that there is a lot of interest, and many companies who had the success in the United States are very active in other countries, and we will see what comes out of those experiences. One final observation of the gas glut is on the alternative fuels to gas. As you know, a growing portion of gas is used for electricity generation. The lower gas prices are putting pressure in terms of economics of generation on renewables and others. And if it stays so, I think it will be difficult in some cases how the renewables will be financed and what kind of implications, what kind of burdens it will have on governments, on consumers, and so on. And if the governments are serious to see higher share of renewables in their energy mix, they will have to make steps vis-à-vis the lower gas prices, as gas is now, with the current price levels, is the default, by default, the electricity generation choice in becoming electricity choice in many countries. Let me tell you one other possible game changer. Gas is definitely a game changer, and we are seeing the impact of that. But there is one possible game changer, which is a completely different story. It is I will share with you an analysis that we have submitted last week to the G20 leaders in Toronto, which was asked by President Obama in the Pittsburgh summit. Namely, this is the fossil fuel subsidies in many countries in the world. We have found out that today, in many countries in the world, oil, gas, and coal prices are heavily subsidized. And these are the countries where the oil, gas, coal demand is coming. The subsidies today reach about $557 billion US. Why it is important? Because in those countries, but most importantly in the G20 context, there is a growing interest of phasing out of those subsidies. Because those subsidies put the price levels very low, and it leads to wasteful consumption of energy. In Iran, for example, the highest subsidies in the world is in Iran, about $100 billion US. It makes about 1/3 of the central government budget. And of course, since the demand is very strongly growing in Iran because of the very low prices, their export availability is in difficulty. And if those subsidies, as the G20 asked us, we look into, were to be phased out, were to be reformed, if they will come in the next 10 years, around 2020, in line with the international prices, what happens? We see that the oil demand may be 6.5 million barrels per day less than what it otherwise would be. So we can gain this oil demand, which is 6.5 million barrels per day, means, ladies and gentlemen, 4 times the current production of Gulf of Mexico. So if you as a result of this saving, you can save 4 times the Gulf of Mexico. So these are some considerations. The era of cheap oil is over. There is a gas glut coming with implications on the especially electricity markets, and there is a potential of a subsidy reform in the developing countries. Now, finally, I wanted to talk to you a bit what needs to be done in order to keep the temperature increase 2 degrees Celsius, which is in line with keeping the carbon concentration about 450 ppm. Before giving you some ideas about that, let me tell you in advance that after Copenhagen, it is becoming very, very difficult to come to this trajectory again. We had a very important chance in Copenhagen to have an international legally binding agreement. We missed that boat, and now it is becoming much more difficult. Now, what needs to be done is the following. First of all, there should be a change in the energy sector, big change. Why? Very simple. More than 2/3 of the emissions come from the energy sector. How we produce energy, how we consume energy, how we distribute energy. So if we don't make a big change in the energy sector, there is no chance whatsoever we can address the climate change. So in our reference scenario, which means with the current policies in place, if we don't make any changes, we are perfectly in line that the CO2 emissions increase in line with a trajectory that the global temperature will increase up to 6 degrees Celsius. So you don't need to be a scientist, climatologist, or anything to know that increase of 6 degrees of Celsius of the global temperature would lead to dramatic effects in the fragile equilibrium of our planet. It will have catastrophic implications, the current policies in place. And what we want to see is to curb the CO2 emission trends and come to a so-called 450 ppm, which is the green one here, which is to limit the temperature increase 2 degrees Celsius. So you have a bad 6 degrees and a good, relatively good 2 degrees trajectory. But to come from the 6 degrees to the 2 degrees, you have to make major efforts. And there are many technologies here we have to use. One of them is, most important one to me, is the efficiency, improving the energy efficiency. But especially in the non-OECD countries, there's a lot of potential there. But of course in the OECD countries as well. Making more use of renewable energies, wind, solar, hydropower, geothermal. From that we have to make more use of them, much more than we have for the time being. We have to make more use of nuclear power. This is an energy source which provides electricity at reasonable cost and without emitting CO2 emissions, and to make use of, hopefully, carbon capture and storage, a very promising technology, especially the fact that today about 40% of the global electricity generation is coming from coal. But I want to highlight one issue here, and I think this is key, at least for me. These efforts have to take place in all regions, not only in one region. In Europe, for example, today, we are discussing should we reduce 20% or 30%. So 30% would be better because it is higher. However, I believe that a 30% reduction of Europe, even though it will bring a prestige to Europe, it will bring Europe an intellectual leadership, moral leadership, and set up an example. In the absence of others playing the same game, it could have significant implication under Europe's economic competitiveness. Let me give you one number. For China, and I think this is a very important number I discovered in our own book today, which we published in November. Namely, China, only China, between now and 2025, in 15 years of time, will add new power capacity about 1,000 gigawatts, which means the current capacity of the United States. So China will add in 15 years 1 United States in their power capacity, and currently about 86% of the Chinese electricity generation comes from coal. If it continues to be coal like this, if there are no major changes, or if it goes from 86 to lower degrees, it would have major implications, whatever the other players do. So therefore, for Europe, it is very important what US and China and other players do before moving. One of the technologies which is very key, I believe, is nuclear power, in addition to efficiency and renewables. And today, there is a growing interest in nuclear power, and there are about 55 gigawatt value of nuclear power plants, and most of the projects are outside of the OECD, and China is also active in that front. But if you have to make this major change for 50, there are two sectors which are key, namely electricity generation and transportation. In terms of electricity generation, if you look at Europe, for example, this is where would the new capacity would come from in our reference scenario, which the current policy is in place. But if you want to go to 450, there is a strong growth need to come from renewables. In terms of investments, the numbers are striking. Between now and 2030, every 7 euro out of 10 euro that goes to new power plants should be for renewables if you want to come to a 450 trajectory. So 70% of all electricity generation-related investments need to go to renewable energies, which highlights the importance of renewable investments. The second area, in terms of the emission reductions, and also for oil security, is the transportation sector. We need to see a major change in the transportation sector. In Europe today, when we look at the car sales, passenger car sales, out of 100 cars sold today, only one car is an advanced car technology, hybrid or electric vehicles and so on. 99 cars are conventional cars, internal combustion engines. If you want to come to a 450, every second car sold in 2030 needs to be an advanced car technology, such as electric vehicles. Every second car sold in Europe. And I can tell you that throughout the world, there is a growing interest in electric vehicles, and the country which is the champion in electric vehicles investment and research and interest is China, but not necessarily because of the climate change reasons, mainly as a result of oil security, oil supply reasons, because they want to limit their oil import bills and their reliance on the imported oil, and they think oil prices may be high, which would have implications for the others. My final slide is about Copenhagen. What happened in Copenhagen? But before that, I have to show you one more slide. Namely, the issue with the electric vehicles. I want to show it especially in Germany, this slide. The issue with electric vehicles is not so simple in terms of CO2 emissions. You can have a very nice electric vehicles without emitting any CO2 in the street, going very nice and handsome way, but you have to have some electricity to fit the car. So we made an analysis. This is the typical car, a conventional car today, with the present European electricity generation mix. This is the CO2 emissions you get, grams CO2 per kilometer. If you go to electric vehicles, but keep the current electricity generation system, which is mainly based on coal and the others today, you have some benefits, definitely. But the benefits are much stronger if you, on one hand, go to electric vehicles, but on the other hand, if you can decarbonize your electricity generation, which means more renewables, more nuclear, and more carbon capture and storage. So why I'm saying this is that electric vehicles is not enough to save the world. You need to look at the decarbonization of the electricity generation and have a holistic approach. Now I can go to Copenhagen. This is the picture I show you. Before Copenhagen, we want to see a 2 degrees, 450, and in the vis-a-vis 6 degrees. After Copenhagen, what happened is that more than 110 countries put some pledges, some targets by themselves, more than 100 countries. And we said, if those countries were to fulfill their targets, what they put for themselves, so there's an if there, because they are not legally binding targets, they are their own targets. If they were to do that, we will come to a trajectory which is between the very bad reference scenario, 6 degrees, and 2 degrees. It will bring us somewhere in between, which is about in line with a more or less 3 degrees temperature increase. First of all, 3 degrees is not acceptable by many scientists. Second, these are not, again, I am telling you, legally binding agreements. We have seen a lot of targets in the past which have never been reached. So, but what could happen is that if those subsidies I mentioned in the beginning, if they were to be phased out, in addition to the lowering the oil demand growth, it can reduce the CO2 emissions substantially. And if you do these two things together, namely reaching the Copenhagen pledges, targets, which are not high enough but still there, but if we can also phase out the subsidies, if the electricity prices in the many developing countries where all the CO2 emissions will come from, then the demand will be lower and we can reduce the CO2 emissions. And putting these two things together, we can come to a 450 degrees trajectory. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have the feeling that I spoke longer than 20 minutes, but I am going to finish by trying to put my thoughts together. First of all, I think even though we may see fluctuations in the next years to come, according to the global economy and so on, once the global economy is back on its feet, we will see that the era of cheap oil is over, and I think it is better to remake our plans accordingly. A 450 trajectory, as we were saying since a year or so, would require massive investments, but it will bring a lot of benefits, such as addressing the oil security issues. The Copenhagen Accord, it is discussed a lot if it is a success, half success, the glass is half full, completely full or empty. I think it was not a success. We have to be frank here. There are some here and there are some, of course, good news, but in general, we wanted to see a legally binding agreement, but it is not there, and we need to see, hopefully, an improvement in the next negotiations. A large gas glut is coming, and this could have major implications for the electricity generation, on the renewables particular, and how the gas is priced in the next years to come. Finally, when we look at the alternative technologies I discussed with you today, such as renewables, nuclear, advanced car technologies, and others, most of them are technologically proven, but many of them would not see the light of the day in the absence of support mechanisms. This can change from country to country, but if it was left to the markets alone, I am not sure that we will see a strong penetration of the advanced technologies as we would like to see. Thank you very much for your attention.
Weitere Informationen und Podcasts unter www.bdew.de